We don't have Casey, so what we will. I'll just take the responsibility, call the group to order, and the first order of business is comments from the public. We have one member of the public online, nobody in the audience. So Chris, if there is
It's only
something.
her. It's me.
Oh,
I'm online and
you are everywhere.
there's two of you. There's two of me.
All right.
If only we could do that.
We will assume then that there are no members of the public to speak, because we'll be hearing from that Chris or this Chris in a few minutes. Jennifer sent out minutes from the April 29th meeting, which hopefully everybody had a chance to review. And if so, I'll accept a motion for their approval.
So moved. I'll
Motion
second it.
and second. Any questions, deletions, changes? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, well done, Jennifer. Thank you. Election of officers. So we are in the electing a chair. I think we thought a chair and a vice chair would probably be sufficient. So,
I'd like to make a motion.
okay,
Like to make a motion nominating Bruce Carlson to be the chair and Chris Rickson to be the vice chair.
okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a second. Is there any discussion? Chris, are you okay with it?
I'm on board.
I'm on board, so am I. Sounds great. All right. We'll take a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. We now have officers. We are moving forward. With that in mind, I will just take 1 second to say thank you for giving me this opportunity, because I really looking forward to making something happen there, and I know Chris is as well. And so this is a great chance to work together to make that happen. But two, I'm pretty impatient, and so what you may end up getting is homework in between our meetings, just to be able to move things forward, because not everything needs to be talked about, you know, but there is, as you saw, between these last two meetings, a good amount of background to bring everybody up to date. And so we will be distributing that, and hopefully you'll have a chance to read it prior to the meetings, and we'll kind of operate the meetings as if that's been read. And if it hasn't been, then we will just, we'll go backwards to pick up whatever is being left off. So, just a warning. We'll move to Chris Costa. When we met last time, we realized that there was a lot of information that the town has about Mariners Way. I really commend, I don't know, Jennifer, whether you put this timeline together since the last meeting, or whether it was already put together, but I think at the time.
Together, actually.
Good job. It's great, and as Tracy pointed out, the links are wonderful, because that can then, you know, give people a chance to bring themselves up to date as needed. But Chris had pointed out that it is really helpful to get a sense of the, you know, of the land that we're talking about there, just the property, what's going on there, what are the limitations, what are the impediments. And so, since you live this stuff, what we were hoping is that you'd be able to come in and give us some background, a little bit about the history of these various studies and things, but really a focus on, okay, here we are today. This is what we have. We've got, you know, X number of acres. We've got this in the way of, you know, zoning. We have this in the way of wetlands, so that this committee can then begin to think about, as we want to put a vision together, what are we working on? So with that, Chris Costa, town planner.
Hello,
et cetera,
everybody.
et cetera. Chris, do
So,
you know everybody around the table?
yes, we've just met. I think we've met.
Okay,
Probably when I was buying the building a couple years ago, yes.
That's everyone.
Okay, great.
All right, so what I did was I put together this little bit of a timeline to kind of give you a little history of what happened, as well as to refresh my memory. So I've been here for over 2 decades now, so I can give you a little bit of history. I can explain zoning, you can kind of go whichever way you want, but in 2012, there was a lot of discussion that Boston Post Road East was looking a little shabby and needed some love. The zoning was a little hodgepodge. It still is hodgepodge. Over the years, there were several developers who came in. Well, I'd like to change it to this. I'd like to change it to that. The zoning commission was a little reluctant because they're, well, you know, if we change it all to business zone, then we're competing with other zones in town. Well, you know, what's this vision for what's now called Mariners Way? So in 2012, this committee, it was supported by the land use department and pretty much from Mystic Market to the highway as you're going towards Ferry Point. It was to be studied to be the gateway. It ended up being to marine recreation. It's kind of changed a little bit. There were different ideas. The committee got together, they did a basic plan. And in the middle, there was a number of different grants that I kind of popped in here to the timeline to move forward with it. So I'm gonna kind of stick to the plan part of it, not necessarily get into the specific grants that are on here. So while the Mariners Way Committee, they wrapped up the 2014 plan. There was a number of different things that happened in between, and then we ended up getting back to this in, was it 2015 and 16, the Economic Development Commission decided to make some regulation change proposals to the zoning commission. I think at the time, rather than visioning way into the future, there was some visioning about, well, gee, I heard so-and-so's looking for X amount of square feet, and I heard someone for, and it ended up that our town planner at the time, she started coaching this with Susie Beckman, our ex-EDC coordinator, and it ended up that I ended up going to the meetings with one of our zoning attorneys to go through this when our town planner went on maternity leave. And there were certain things during those workshops, you know, I'm not sure the zoning commission's really gonna go for that. And the zoning commission at the time had written initially a letter towards one of the plans saying, you know, we definitely think something needs to happen, it needs to be done correctly, but we have a number of concerns. So we moved along, there were these 3 petitions and a map change to start rezoning that area, and it ended up, the zoning commission pulled out their letter and said, this isn't what we want, these are the concerns, and they all were unanimously denied. So I don't know if part of it was EDC might have thought at the time, because I was working for the town, working for zoning, but I did put some warnings out. I don't think they're gonna like the building size. I don't think, no, that works. It's their regulation, it was their petition, it didn't happen. Following that.
What was the, if you can briefly explain, like the general concept behind the Mariners Way overlay zone? Did it have, like, what were the sort of focused uses?
I'm just gonna, you know,
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
gonna run,
okay.
I'm thinking if I run through the plan.
Sorry.
And then kind of go through the zoning districts and explain
Okay.
kind of how the overlay, and I do have that information right here. Some of it I don't remember 200% because it was 10 years ago now. 10 years, whatever the timeline says. So we then hired a consultant called Civic Moxie. Civic Moxie, we had countless workshops, and in one of your plans here, they went through a whole discussion of, well, are we branding? So right in this room, we had all different types of logos, from sailboats to lighthouses, to what are we naming it, what are we branding it, what are we doing with this Mariners Way? And it kind of got the gateway to marine recreation with the hope that something would happen in the Ferry Road area. And what would this, and there were a number of different visions for it, whether they were realistic or not. I'm just gonna put my opinion, but that's, where some folks are like, well, we could go over there and put a giant big box store, and to make it look like Mariner's Way, we're gonna put a big anchor in the front, so it looks nautical. And other folks had the idea of, well, let's theme this, we could have X as a theme, we could have only marine related businesses, or we could have, there was a lot of discussion, restaurants, we could have indoor recreational areas. And so the Civic Moxie group, this kind of was the brand. And Mariner's Way came about. There was always the idea of having, maybe some housing, having big campuses, big areas. And part of that, when we get to it, is based on a number of properties that are somewhat no longer in the picture of meeting. So, following that, there was also the EDC went through and we developed the TIF, the tax increment financing, to start putting some money aside so that improvements could be made. And then I think we all got a little distracted. COVID came, and then in 2024, Bruce, myself, Jennifer, Matt Pugliese, Carl, am I forgetting anybody?
Nope. That was a group.
That was our group, and we started with a company called Camoin Associates Inc. And we've been talking about Mariner's Way, but things have changed. Is this really realistic? Let's call it the Boston Post Road East District. Maybe Mariner's Way isn't really what we're thinking right now, but who knows? People know it is Mariner's Way. It's been branded a little bit. And that most recent study came out in 2024. Then there was a discussion of potentially having a committee, or maybe a redevelopment agency. There's a number of properties that were neglected and blighted and issues. And then the Board of Selectmen went through, this committee was established. And one thing we did end up doing too, which is something separate and it's upstairs, is we did do a road survey from Mystic Market, pretty much to the highway. And that was really to look at not necessarily the developments that could go there. It was looking at the width of the road. So, is this somewhere we could put, is there enough room for a bike lane and a sidewalk? Depending on how this committee and future committees decide to move along with it, maybe it's something we need to have streetscape improvements. If we make it pretty, maybe the revitalization will come. So there was a lot of different thoughts. And the one thing I will say through all of this, there were countless outreach meetings to tenants, to property owners, starting back 10 years ago. They were timed, some of them were timed, so business, if you had your business open, you could come here at 7 o'clock, you can go through. So there was a lot of outreach, and I think right now, folks who own or rent on Mariner's Way, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, or just kind of like, well, what's going on with this? It's just kind of chugging along, but we haven't gotten anywhere. So that's, I think, what this committee is here for. It's trying to kind of focus in and say, okay, these are all the things that have happened. Jennifer, please jump in if you want to add anything. People get sick of me talking, and go through and let's see, here we are. How do we make something happen? Is that helpful?
Yeah, you will go into a little more detail in some of those areas now, right? You're just kind of doing.
Yeah, so what I did, and there's a little map just to kind of guide you. Our GIS, I don't have a GIS layer right now that kind of does the outline of Mariner's Way that's on Map Geo. But I think Map Geo is probably the best tool, because we need to talk about the land, but then we have to kind of look at how it changes when we start adding all different types of layers of development. So getting
We need to get a permission from you.
Fine. Okay. I don't know if you can make this a little bit bigger and maybe cut out. Yeah. You should be able to widen the volume. I can do that. On full screen, yeah, go on the.
Is it view up in the top right?
Yep, maybe that.
Shared content only.
Okay.
Great to have experts.
So I did give you sections of regulations, I know it already was sent out as your homework. But I'll go through and kind of give you a brief overview. So you can kind of see here on the aerial, this whole gateway to marine recreation, because it brings you to Ferry Point. It brings you to a lot of area for potential. The whole Essex Road area too, there's some restaurants, there's some hotels that could, are probably underutilized, there's not enough people going out there, in my opinion, I think some of the hotel owners will agree. The marinas need some love at this point. So you've kind of got this loop, which we called somewhat the Ferry Road loop. And then you get down to what I would say is the whole Mariners Way as you go through and you go down to Route 1. It's a little more difficult than I thought. So you can kind of see here, you've got these areas here are marsh. You can tell they're marsh just from the way that they are, but we have other areas here too. I'll just give you some underlying lay of the land. Where you've got, this is a construction. That's B&L construction. You've got some buildings here. You've got these underutilized properties here that were formerly what was called the Hallisey-Heineman properties. So the Hallisey-Heineman properties were custom marine. There was some vacant land out there, some older industrial buildings. And the property owner had them many, many years, both of them. They were always willing to investigate new opportunities. Both of them passed away. And the Hallisey-Heineman estate sold those properties and they're now under ownership by a number of different LLCs, but you can see kind of this whole dilapidated. I wish I could make the screen a little bit bigger.
That's fine.
You've got Ocean Performance. You've got a number of businesses. And here you've got the Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And then you've got a lot of smaller businesses, car washes that kind of go through. But this area here, which we call the Hallisey-Heineman pieces, were really the ones I think that everybody was interested in because they were the larger tracts of land and said, well, there's going to be some type of a redevelopment. Maybe that should be the focus because we're going to start getting into the constraints. Now, if you look, we're going to.
So Chris, so just to capture what we were talking about at the last meeting. So the Hallisey-Heineman is the properties that have been bought by the people who are interested in working with Amtrak and using the property over the next, whatever number of years, 6, 7 years, as laydown for the rebuilding of the bridge. That's
Correct, so so they're saying 6 years, I'm gonna say 8 years. Projects always take a little bit longer, and there's some good reason. So you've got the railroad here. They built a road that kind of goes through and it can get you down to the water. So that's really, a road along the railroad is the best way to get materials in. We're not here to build a railroad bridge, but that was the reasoning. They need area to stockpile materials. The High Line building, I believe it was called, the office building, they need places for offices and contractors, they need parking, they need all of that, and this was the perfect area to get, that access just following through the railroad.
So the space is just repurposed. Nobody came in and built.
The High Line building is repurposed. It was interesting. I did go back and I pulled and I went through the files. It actually was when they did the last bridge project.
Oh,
They used it for the same use. The buildings, I've been through all of them. It's been quite some time. They're all pretty dilapidated. We had homeless folks in and out of there, which was a concern of Halsey and Heineman. But people kept getting back in there, living in there, hanging out in there, whatever they were doing in there. And the other thing with the properties is there's some brownfield concerns. So they did manufacturing. We do have some information on brownfield studies, but I'm not going to get into that. We'll kind of stay on track with what's going out there. So that I think was looked at kind of the sweet spot, the biggest spot. This could be the gem by some of these other folks in previous committees, is if we can do something with that, that's going to revitalize the whole area. So you also want to think about too, we do have a number of established businesses and uses as you go through. I can do a little street view guide if you want to, if that makes it easier, but you have car washes, you have Tilcon, which on the other end, which people always need concrete, you're in asphalt, and you're never going to get rid of a business like that. Not one that would want to, but it's not like they're going to say, gee, I'm going to sell today for housing, because their permits and their businesses, you can't get those permits anymore. They're going to be here. You've got towing companies, you've got car washes, you've got warehousing, you've got birds.
It's interesting because, I'm the furthest end down. And so Waterview borders Waterview is across the street from me, next to Jade Court. And so they've really beautified, they've really done a nice job with that area. The gas station was renovated across from me, and then the other gas station with the car wash, they renovated. So it feels like that end has had a little more renovation maybe, because, I've got wild birds is very attractive and.
Well, and that's why I think the larger properties on the end, because they were tied up
For
with
so
the
long.
families and the estates, the people said, well, if you're really gonna put something big out here, kind of your catalyst, that would be the end. And you're right. I mean, there's been the little mobile kiosk. We had a gorgeous plan for a convenience store, maybe 10 years ago, beautiful. They even had places you could pull your boat up to gas, to fuel, to go down. There was discussions of having a little sandwich shop in there, so you go by, you fuel your boat, you go to the state launch. There's been a lot of interest in great things, and there has been improvement without a doubt. But there's some properties like those who've just, it's kind of stayed that way. Part of there's also, and I kind of think I should start, you kind of go through from the head of Mariner's Way. You've got this vacant piece of property, which is wet, has a cedar swamp in there. You've got this mini golf course, so you've got a number of things going on here, and I'll start, I guess, with wetlands. So you have tidal wetlands in some areas and you have inland wetlands. Inland wetlands are freshwater wetlands, or they're 100-foot review area from a freshwater watercourse. I'm making this very simple terminology. I'm not gonna get into all the details.
Thank you.
Tidal wetlands, there's a 50-foot no building setback from tidal wetlands. So, you know, as you kind of go through, there's
How
some
about inland? So, because there is, within this, is also inland, what
inland and
is the setback for a building, or is it a matter of, it's a review, a case by case basis?
it's 100-foot upland review. So pretty much it's a no-no to fill in inland wetlands. You really want to keep 100-foot upland review area to protect the wetlands. It doesn't mean you can't go 50 feet from the wetlands. There are very rare circumstances where wetlands have been filled, but it's in a situation where you have one big property, and sometimes wetlands also are created over years of runoff. Sounds kind of weird. So wetlands, inland wetlands are defined by soil type. So there's a soil scientist that goes out with an auger and he goes through and he pulls the soil and says, these are really wet inland wetland soils. And then the tidal wetlands, which have more of a salt content to them, are defined by elevations. They're defined by plants and salinity, kind of very bare bones, basic wetlands 101. So you've got those factors here. So I'm just gonna pick on this area here. So now I start adding wetlands.
So that's inland wetlands.
Right, so the pink is inland. So this area here is inland. This outskirt here is the 100-foot upland review. So now, as you look at these properties, you just gotta think about it. Look at this nice lot here. Look what happens here.
So, just so what does happen? Does that mean undevelopable at all? What does that mean?
So in this case, this is a general indicator. It's not flagged. So you'll see areas here with these little blue lines. That means we've had some survey or soils work that kind of flags the actual location. This is just really a general indicator for planning purposes. This property has been surveyed. It does have a new owner. There was also the Poinkowski parcels, Mr. Poinkowski, many large tracts of land, not only in Old Saybrook, but all along the East Coast. So, you know, these could get flagged. It's my understanding there's kind of a sweet spot somewhere in here where it's out of that upland review area. I don't have that survey. But the thing is now, if I lighten the transparency of it, here's your roads.
Yeah.
So now you have to get in, if there's an area back here or over here, now you have to get a road in. And I'm just picking on this parcel because it kind of shows you how it could be difficult potentially in certain circumstances, that it could be this is a general indicator map. There could be a way you could just go right through here and have the easy access. But in order to do that, you have to survey the property, you have to flag all the wetlands. And then you have these little dots. And the little dots are suspected or confirmed vernal pools. So vernal pools are also protected under the Inland Wetland and Water Courses Act. Vernal pools are seasonal depressions of water. So you could have a vernal pool in your backyard and go out there and look at it and be like, oh, that puddle comes back every year. Yeah, I don't like that puddle. Well, that puddle is kind of the breeding ground for frogs and salamanders and all the little species that start the food chain. So vernal pools are protected. There's actually case law that protects them beyond 100 feet. We're not going to get into all of that, but they're also protected as well. Wetlands do have different degrees of how important they are. Some folks say, you know, a lot of when the not the railroad, when the highway went in, sometimes water shed off and it created wetlands. So the owner of this property said, it's all, when they put the highway in, when he's like, that's what happened. I never had wetlands out there. Well, the Wetlands Act came in the 70s. Prior to that, if you go through town, places like Benny's, Job Lot, Pat's Country or Mystic Market, those sites, there were truckfuls of dirt brought in 24 hours a day to fill all those wetlands before the Wetlands Act went in. So sometimes there's certain sites where they're like, my building is sinking. And it's because someone just filled and filled and filled the wetland, and here we are 50 years later, and everything's settling, and now all of a sudden you're seeing your building fall apart because there's issues with what was under that building. So everyone can learn.
However, you could get in there and flag that large track and find.
Well, I want to show you, but kind of go through, I'm gonna make this
Yep.
darker again. And I'm not picking on any specific properties, but this is Mariner's Way.
Yep.
So this is all inland. So to kind of give you, this is Mill Rock Road East. It's hard to kind of see with the overlay. This is where the former Sol Siam is. You go through, this is Boston Post Road East is back here. You know, and there's people like, well, you know, there are properties here, but look at some of the vacant properties. What happens to them? So you cut a lot of them out of developable land, or initially, you know, the thought, sometimes someone will go out there and flag it, it'll be totally different, and you go, wow, I can't believe you figured out there was X amount of upland area that you could build on. It happens. But this is for planning purposes. So as you go through, you know, this is where the Halsey item, and this is Ocean Performance. But as you look at this, now you've got all these wetlands concerns. So wetlands is really one of the biggest issues hindering development, but then you also have zoning regulations. And then you have another thing, so you imagine not only zoning, everything is like a cake. So you have a piece of property and it's this big, you know, and then you put another layer of the cake on, and the wetlands makes it this big. And then you go through and you add the zoning, and you say, okay, I can meet the setbacks, and I got my wetlands permit, I've got everything here. And then you have to have soil testing for your septic. And then it could go like this, or it could go away. Does it kind of make sense? So you're not just looking at zoning, you're looking at wetlands, zoning, health. You could have topography issues, there could be brownfield issues. So your land this big slowly kind of gets crunched in, and you hope to get that sweet spot that you can develop.
Is there, in the various studies that have been done, have any of those taken on the soil issues to understand what the ability of the soils out there to take wastewater and solid waste?
There really hasn't been, to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been site by site information. I'm sure we have plenty of test pit information, you know, for existing sites or some. I mean, you can do a soils analysis of the area, just to kind of get a general overview. But sometimes, and even in other planning functions, not this project, we've said, you know, hey, what if we go through it, knock on, you know, talk to these 6 property owners and see if they'll do soils testing, and they're like, what do you want to do here? And the door closes. You know, so you have to think about that too. There's some folks who like what they like, they own their property, and you also have to encourage those property owners to invest in their properties. And sometimes, even though we come up with the greatest ideas, you know, and I'm gonna say all over town, we can say, hey, you know what, we can go through, we can fix this whole area up in the property, and goes, we're not doing that, have a great day. So you also need that buy-in, and I think over the years, that's why there was so much push to get people in here to talk to them about it. But I don't think the plans were ever refined enough. I mean, in the original plan, and it was a great committee, it says, well, let's put a Dave and Buster's, and people are like, you wanna put a Dave and Buster's out of all the things? And it was somebody really wanted Dave and Buster's on that committee. Not that it's a bad thing, not that it's fun, but you know, that's really what you have to think about. You know, you have your cake, you have what's out there, and then you have to deal with the folks, and there's folks in town, they'll be like, hey, you know, you could really fix up your property, you can do this and that, and I'm like, I own my property, why do I want a mortgage? I get a paycheck every month from my tenant. You know, are you gonna pay for it? Is the town gonna pay for it? And it's unfortunate, there's some folks who've had this mentality that they're happy with what they have, and I mean, I get it. But that's a whole other.
So let's touch on where we are with zoning out there. And we don't need to go into a lot of detail because a lot of the details here, but it's good to know what the various zones are. And then that can be part of the homework, is to really understand what is allowable or not allowable in the zone.
So one thing we did talk a little bit about here. Just so that you know, someone had mentioned flood zones. That's something you don't really have to worry about as much. Is you get closer into the areas where you're getting towards the water, that's where you're getting those low-lying areas. So that's one pretty good thing we don't have to worry about, you know, in the area.
It was really on the other side of the tracks
Correct.
towards, we,
So, like,
It's on the inland wetlands, subject to approval. Can't you fill in inland wetlands if you create another inland wetlands elsewhere, like comparable size?
it's not really, I haven't really seen many of them. I've seen them in parking lots. I've seen them. I mean, there's
Like
one.
the state would do that when they put a road in.
So the state and federal government, the state goes through deep. So the federal government, even with a railroad project, they have to do a very large wetlands mitigation project with the state after this, because they are going, you know, along the railroad in areas. So that's out of our jurisdiction. So you kind of, you know, like when the DOT garage was built, we got a letter in the mail and they said, hey, we're building this DOT garage. Do you have anything to say about it? It doesn't go to wetlands, it doesn't go to zoning. So that's the thing, you kind of have to take the local projects apart from what state and federal government do.
So is it an option though? I mean, is it?
I've been here 25 years and I
Yeah,
can think
same.
of one wetland that was filled in a parking lot. And it was kind of it wasn't a quality producing wetland. People have proposed it.
Okay.
They
So it could be proposed, it could be part of an integrated proposal.
could be. I don't think it would be well received unless it was something pretty insignificant. It depends on the circumstances and, I mean, if someone came to me and said, hey, you know, I wanna go put a XYZ improvement store in and I'm gonna fill in all the wetlands, I'll build something over here. I wouldn't encourage them to do it. I don't think the Wetlands Commission, especially undisturbed wetlands that are pretty healthy and functioning. A little smaller one, it's happened. The only other time I've seen it is back in the 70s when the trucks were coming in and coming in and coming in and filling and filling. The wetland map came in and I've had a few surprises over the years where in the 70s, people who own properties with wetlands went to the Wetlands Commission and were able somehow to get the wetlands removed from the map. Even though if you've been out physically and looked at what's there, looks like a wetland to me, looks like a wetland to the soil scientists. So there were a handful of those that I've seen, but very little filling of wetland.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else before we move on?
The B and L property that you showed, do you think there's an opportunity there,
For
development? I think I've been out there, there's boulders and stumps and dirt piles, right?
I mean, there's development opportunity all through Mariners Way, there's development opportunity. But it's, what are you developing and I'm not
Understand,
picking
like,
on any particular property owner, but the thing is, it could be. The little car wash, there's a development opportunity there, potentially, yes. Everything's developable sometimes for the right price, I hate to say that,
you would
but
mention
I'm
like
not.
Tilcon, they're pretty set and they're probably not.
So some of it has to do with companies like Tilcon, is that they can't get the permits from deep to do what they're doing anymore. So they would never give it up, they would sell it, they wouldn't say, gee, we're gonna sell this off to do housing, because it's more valuable to sell it to a competitor or someone in that business. So a lot of the businesses too that have permits, some of them, they don't issue those permits anymore. So how we have like a lot of grandfathered businesses in town, but at the same time, these are kind of grandfathered state permits that are like gold. So, I mean, I remember someone said, do you think Tilcon would, want to put housing there? And they would never give up their permit. I don't see them ever doing that. I think it would be so unlikely, for a lot of these businesses, but it's talking to the property owners and things like that. But something like that, I would say highly unlikely.
B&L is an active business, right? It's not like the Custom Marine or anything where no one's
No,
there.
they're active, they're right up against the railroad, they have a permit to put, materials onto trains. They purchase some of those properties, there's properties owners there. So it's part of their active business.
And they have that other property off the road to Essex. Right.
Yeah.
Where all the mulches
Yeah,
and stuff.
So the real, what you're looking at is, everything's for sale, except Canada. But everything's for sale for the right price.
Right.
And part of what this is an economic development mission. And if you can take a car wash and turn it into the Eiffel Tower, you might increase the value and somebody might be willing to part with it. But it's really coming up with that, as we talked about last time, that plan, that concept. What are those things that would drive up value where somebody would be saying, you know what, I'm willing to walk my $50,000 property for $1 million.
And that's what I'm trying not to be, and obviously we're gonna talk about businesses there, but I don't want to pinpoint, on this area with the wetland or that area with the wetland.
No, as I said, Chris, we just need to know where we should be looking. And then back, Bruce, what you were talking about, and you and I have spoken about it before, which is when you're doing this type of mass development, is trying to come up with a centrally located wastewater treatment facility that would take care of all of Mariners Way, in a single space that we wouldn't use each parcel. We would make keep holding.
Well, but it's if you have. Right, I mean, there's areas out there, I wouldn't say you're encouraging a wastewater treatment plant, but you may have perfect soils out there. I mean, there's been developers over the years for big box stores. I mean, countless big box national chains that have come out there, and the issue has been the zone. So the zoning commission has kind of dug their heels a little bit into, we don't have a lot of industrial land. And granted, we don't have the Donnelly's type of industry or the marine manufacturing industry, but to start taking industrial land and putting retail stores and housing and things like that, changing industrial that way, once you lose it and something else comes in, you've lost that land that's owned industrial, whether it's a contractor's business, whether, there's someone here who came in and they said, hi, I'm a blacksmith. I said, okay. I mean, but it happens, and that's the whole thing, and if you remove the industrial land, so the zoning commission's always been kind of protective of industrial land, even though industry is not the industry of 60 years ago. So part of the issue, and I'm not saying an issue, but this area is a hodgepodge of zoning. Why am I getting lost here? So you've got a little bit of a hodgepodge of zoning. And we're gonna start. Well, I guess I could do an overview and then we can go through. So this area here, this was that kind of that big piece of swamp. Mystic Market is over here. Just so you know, my vision isn't not what it used to be. So you've got Mystic Market here, which is actually in an industrial zone. Seems a little odd, I'll have to double check, but these properties, you got industrial. Now you go through, I don't want to make it too dark. So these darker purples here, this is that swamp, this is the Northeast Medical, Som Siam, B4. B4 is gateway business zone. B4 allows for large format retail. It allows for a variety of different uses as well as some uses such as construction activities and so forth. So to give you an idea of a B4, the Max's Place Shopping Center, Big Y, that's B4. So you can have all those types of uses that are there. I'm not going to go through them, but you can have large stores, you can have West Marine, but you can also have contractor storage, warehousing, those types of businesses in the B4. So it's a little bit of a mix. This area here, Tilcon, all these lighter colors are industrial. But now look at the whole Jade Court. You've got, B4 also has car dealers, car washes. Maybe I'll just go along the front. You've got some of these warehousing buildings in the B4. And then you go through, and this goes all the way up to, it used to be Casual Curtain. I think it's a real estate company now. Or no, there's Fine Fettle. Those are all B4. There's a little sliver up here. Office buildings. So from Fine Fettle all the way down, would it be helpful to get the little street guy out?
No.
Review, okay.
I think
So you can kind of see, starting from Mystic Market, you've got B4 all along Route 1, but then you've got industrial. And it's a little bit interesting because back on Boston Post Road Place, you do have an auto dealership. You have a few non-conforming houses. And that were there. So this is all industrial land.
So how did what came first, the houses or the you know what I mean, like, how did?
I think the houses. So you gotta remember something too, there's a lot of old houses, even on, like, behind Mystic Market.
Yeah,
When you go down Mill Rock Road East, you kind of got houses going to industrial zones. And then recently just had a situation, I was talking to somebody, I never realized, I'm like, wow, the zoning's messed up. And they're like, oh, well, when Route 9 moved.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the thing too, the highway also impacted, the zoning. So,
You're in there, that house is a legal pre-existing non-conforming use. So if it was there when this was done in 61. And that house was there in 1950, he gets to stay there
you gotta remember,
regardless.
zoning was 1947.
Right.
I mean, it seems like a long time ago, but there's a lot of houses in town that are before 1947. And folks have just stayed there, even if you go through. There are some houses, see these
Yeah.
houses back here?
yeah, there's a lot of them, yeah.
So you've got some housing in here, then there's some auto repair, there's a little finders, keepers, some kind of smaller. But even if you look at some of the buildings, they look like houses because they were houses.
Initially, they were houses.
Yes. So then you get into, this over here, this is where you've got, so this is Ocean Performance. You've got another build, these are a bunch of different, I have to go by the name, I can't. You go through, you've got some boat storage, you've got some storage units. This here, so you can see this was actually the custom marine property, this was the last one, you can see it's still under Heineman. That one just recently sold.
And those are industrial as well.
These are all industrial.
How many pieces are there to the Halsey Heineman?
I can go through them, I'm
I
sure.
think there are 11 total, or maybe it was 11.
So they're all, so this
Seven.
one here is, this was a, this is where the High Line building is, that's the offices. You do have some of the B and L activities here. But they also purchased some of the properties here. It's a different real estate, but they're affiliated. So then you look at this, you say, okay, now you go all the way up to Fine Fettle. And then as you're kind of going down, as you're going towards Springbrook, you've got the office buildings, there's a little stretch of office buildings, Broder's offices over there. And then you have this weird swath of B3. So B3 is a combination of residential and commercial, but it's very small scale. So an example of B3 is if you go between Luigi's and McDonald's, and you look at, you've got some houses, but you have some smaller office buildings. And especially these little lots in here, these are all residential houses. You've got, I think, Kanati Chiropractic, or, sorry if I date myself with some of the names. I always want to say Pat's Country Kitchen, I think I'll never stop saying that. So you have that, and then you've got these other parcels in here, which also had a little bit of marine industrial. I kind of look at Mariner's Way as it's kind of this swath in here. Because then you start taking the corner, there's a little Gladeview's here.
Yeah.
Is Gladeview in the TIF? I think Gladeview's in
I can't remember.
the, I have a list. I hope. I guess it doesn't matter. And then you've got some houses here that are owned by Gladeview. You've got the 45 Ferry Road. You know, as you take the bend, that's where the housing in the ball field, there's a nice piece of, nice, beautiful, non-conforming house on industrial property. So part of what's happened to is you have to look at the zoning. So it's kind of this hodgepodge. So somebody says, I'm gonna come in and open a Home Depot or a Costco or some large development. Obviously, say you find your land, well, you need a B3 piece, an industrial piece, a B4 piece, depending on how those land and industrial, which doesn't allow for the retail. So part of this is trying to figure out, well, what does this need to be zoned? And I think the zoning commission over the years, people will come in and say, well, you know, you want to take this all and zone it B4. And it's like, well, we've got B4 on Route 1. We've got B2, which is the old Saybrook Shopping Center. And there were different developers who came in and they're like, we're gonna put big rock box retail. And it's kind of a good thing we don't have a lot of big box retail because we may have a lot of big empty box retail if they had gone along with those trends. So what do you put here that fits, but doesn't really compete against your Main Street, your Route 1, your existing businesses? Because I can think of one business right now that would move there in 2 seconds if they had the zoning and would wipe out a big area of retail in Old Saybrook. You know, so that's the thing, there's a lot of businesses that would like to move to get there. The other thing, and I think Bruce had mentioned, and there was a good discussion with the zoning commission, that meeting, is there's also been some discussion over the years about closing the dangerous highway entrance and exit.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so what? Well, if you're trying to get people to develop in here, especially larger retail or people that have a lot of traffic coming in here, the implication is you don't have your easy on and off the highway anymore. So whether that's gonna happen or not, just kind of keep that in the back of your head too, as you're looking at all of this. So it's, you know, what's the balance?
So I know that we're bouncing up against 6:30 and I want to be sensitive to that, but let me just, could you just answer Casey's question about the overlay, which will also give
Okay.
the rest of us a little bit of information about what an overlay is.
Okay, so there were the overlay at the time. And this actually, I can probably get these printed big. This was part of our exercise 10 years ago. You can see it. So this is the area, this is Pat's, Mystic Market. The overlay was gonna go all the way down through the whole area. I don't remember all the details of the overlay, but what we did was when we had these workshops is we actually scaled out little buildings. And we put the wetlands on there because we said, oh, here's 200,000 square feet. Part of the overlay, if I remember correctly, had building sizes double what the zoning commission would want for their cap size. So you take a building like this, it's gonna fit here, it's gonna fit here, it's not gonna fit in the other areas and meet setback. So the overlay, there's a whole different zoning discussion, would potentially drop under the right circumstances over this. So it's another layer to the cake. So you've got the I1, you know, the B4, the underlying districts. Then you add the wetland layer over it. Then this overlay could drop in certain circumstances and allow for some things that may not be allowed in the underlying, pretty much through a map amendment consecutively with, I believe that's the way we designed this, consecutively with a potential development plan.
So it's not actually taking away opportunity. The idea was it would maybe allow something more to happen.
It's a map change,
It's a
and
map.
the map change overlays,
There's
the
overlay, plan
existing
development
zoning.
district.
and whatever the map is that you've
I
created.
don't
for
remember the
district,
actual tool, Casey, I'll be honest. I
That's
don't know
what
if it was
floats
just
over
the
there.
overlay of that
Or if it
area.
was floating.
So there's different ways, there's floating zones,
Yep.
there's plan development, design development, plan development districts, there's different tools in the toolbox. And this overlay,
Is that-
It's to allow more to happen in that zone or?
What it does is, again, the
Well,
way
there's
I've
multiple-
used it is, I've used it and Chris and I have talked about it, it's an industrial zone, and Bruce and I talked about it, it was an industrial zone. It was an overflow parking lot. Zone industrial, we can't give it up, we can't give it up, you know, it's been vacant for 50 years. At some point you give it up, and so what we did, we went in and did 40 housing units. And it was a match of duplexes and townhouses, and you go there and there's just nice houses along the street, just like the next houses along the street, it's infill housing. And so what we did was, it was called the Neighborhood Development District. And that it was zone, underlying zone was I1, but it was NDD1, they created the right for 40 houses to go in that area.
okay,
But you're
Sorry
correct,
about
that
that.
usually with an overlay zone, like, right, the idea is that under certain circumstances, so say like there's a bigger minimum lot size, or you have to have more frontage, or whatever it is, like under certain circumstances, you can pivot to this other zone in depending which tool you use.
there's different
But yeah,
tools, yeah, so
You can
it's.
pivot to like a different Right, different opportunities,
So you
but
could
under certain
have
circumstances.
an overlay and say, okay, this is where some of these things could land.
Right.
And then what happens is you have to have a whole other set of regulations that apply. So you can say, well, these things could apply, but you have to have 5 acres of land, no wetland. You can only have these additional uses. It's complicated. There's another way of doing it with a development district, where you go through and someone comes in and they say, hi, I wanna do this development, here's my concept. And we have and then you have, this is where I want you to drop the map. So what happens is the zoning commission and the boards and commissions can look at it and say, yeah, that might work there. So back to zoning. Regulation and map changes are legislative changes. So what that means is I can come in and say, hi, I want to put a nuclear plant right in this neighborhood here. And the zoning commission can say, yeah, we just think it's a bad idea. If you come in and you have an underlying zoning regulation and you go through and say, well, you know, I want to build this development, but they don't allow fried chicken restaurants in the residence district. The zoning commission go check, 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 no, that's not allowed, deny, they have a reason to deny, in addition to the lot sizes and the setbacks and so forth. Someone could come in and say, I wanna put that in and amend that underlying map, and what happens is, so say if we say in this residential zone, we're gonna put a fried chicken restaurant. Well, that could apply almost in every residential district in town. So the overlay kind of puts the area a little bit, it narrows the area, I guess is the best way to do it. I'm making this very, very simplistic. But the overlay or a planned development district or design development district, it can open it up, but there's different ways to do it. You can say, this is the area, but you have to have this, and this in order to do that. I think, I don't remember exactly. I do know that many of the uses, someone at one point called this the free-for-all zone. Because it was, we'll take Joe's Restaurant, we'll take, you know, a giant distribution warehouse, we'll take residential, you know, you come in and you're willing to pay taxes, and I think that was part of it was, you know, let's get what we can get out there during some of this plan. I'm gonna be flat out honest, whether people on these committees agree or disagree, but I think that was part of the reason for failure.
Were there any like design standards of any sort or anything?
We have all those in place, we don't need them,
Okay,
so that's all in place, it didn't have to do with the design, it was, I think there was a number of different things, you know, first of all. There was, you know, there was another regulation change. So this one here showed taking, here we are at Mystic Market. Mystic Market, the area here, which is where Som Siam was, there's a little green space. And that was, at the time, the thinking was, and I still kind of think it does make a little bit of sense, this is a B4 district, which does not allow for residential. To change it to B3, because there was some residential here, you could kind of have a little bit of a neighborhood, but now you have to think about things when you start zoning. There's a garage, a construction business, and a restaurant that could become non-conforming. So these little houses here that are not allowed, every time they want an addition, they have to go ask for a variance and show they have some kind of a hardship. Now you bring this forward and you have folks who are out there with their businesses saying, well, you're making me non-conforming. I'm happy going along with my business the way that it is. And I'm saying any of these, not, but just trying to kind of give you a visual. I understand you're trying to do something good, but at the same time, why are you putting me in this situation? The other section, this is the little section where the office buildings are, it's currently B4. B4 again is that gateway business, larger format retail, big Y. It was to change that little section there to B3, which allows for offices and residential and many of the uses. However, in the B3, there's building cap sizes. So I'm in there with my business and I could put a much larger building with different setbacks in there. And now you're saying my building can only be 6,000 square feet. So you have to think about that with zoning. It's not just, this is a great idea. You're also impacting the different developments. And then this area of industrial was also proposed to go to B3. I think the reasoning there, you have that nice house over here. You've got, it's a good area, maybe kind of easing into that recreational district, but it's also industrial. And if this builds up, now these folks might have a racetrack going to the marine recreation. And don't get stuck on marine recreation, that was just kind of the theme through this. So it's not just trying to, it's a balance. You want to make property owners who are taxpayers happy with their businesses and not make it difficult. You want a balance, you want to keep your industrial. You've got a lot of things to juggle. And I think from the beginning, the zoning commission, there were meetings, there was a memo, and the zoning commission went through and pulled that memo out of the meeting, and they said, we had these concerns from the beginning. So I think one of the biggest things this commission has to do, or committee, as you go forward, is you can do great things with planning, but without the buy-in of not just the commissions, but the property owners and folks like that, you kind of have to think about that balance. Sorry, I'm going off track a little
Yeah,
bit, I'm
no.
hoping.
No, you're on, you're
That was the
absolutely.
goal.
But
This-
I think we need to break it here. We won't jump into plans for future meetings, but what I will do is suggest that I will, let's do the reading on the zoning that Chris has provided, as well as some of the other material. I'll send out a link for a couple of the videos from previous meetings that might be useful to take a look at before we get together again. And then at the next meeting, we can compare notes around, where we can get things lost in the detail around zoning before we think about what it is we want to do. And so my sense is maybe we pull ourselves back, we begin to think about within the realm of what's possible, what do we want to do? And then we'll begin to think, how do we do what we want to do? But to get there, I agree with what, the last point that Chris just made, which is we need to do this not in a vacuum. We need to bring together the property owners and the business owners out there. We need to be thinking about the planning and zoning commissions. And we need to, I think, what I would find very interesting would be if we set up a session with developers, just to hear from them. What is, you drive that strip, you think about this because this is what you do. What do you think? And just begin to collect a bunch of ideas and then see what we can do. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Sure.
A second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. And putting on my other hat, if you haven't voted, please
That's it.
go to the high school and vote.
You flock.